Jake's betrayal sliced through my heart like a paper cut from my own handmade invitations. I stood frozen among the rose bushes, watching my fiancé and Vanessa, my maid of honor, hunched over my carefully crafted wedding invitations, their laughter carrying across the venue's garden. My artistic passion, reborn after years of self-doubt, withered under their mockery. God, Emma and her rustic aesthetic, Vanessa giggled, tracing her manicured finger over the delicate calligraphy I'd spent weeks perfecting. These look like something from a craft fair. Jake snorted. I know. I tried telling her to just order the gold foil ones like everyone else in our circle, but she insisted on hand lettering everything. His voice dropped to a stage whisper. It's embarrassing. Our followers expect luxury content, not this homemade stuff. I gripped the stone balustrade, the rough texture biting into my palms. The garden's perfume of roses and jasmine turned sickly sweet as my stomach churned. These were the two people I trusted most in the world, the ones who were supposed to support my creative dreams. Instead, they were ridiculing my work behind my back. The rehearsal dinner that evening buzzed with excitement. Everyone except me. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, forcing smiles as guests complimented the venue. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the aroma of seared scallops as waiters circulated with champagne. Look at this adorable little guest book, Vanessa announced to the small crowd gathered near the entrance. She clutched my hand-bound book, its cover adorned with pressed flowers and hand-lettered with "Our Beginning." I beamed with pride despite the earlier betrayal. Maybe I'd misheard them in the garden. Perhaps it had been a momentary lapse. Emma made it herself, she continued, her voice honeyed with fake admiration. Then, with a theatrical gasp, her full glass of red wine tilted precisely over the open pages. Oh no! Deep crimson soaked through the handmade paper, obliterating hours of delicate work. My heart plummeted as guests murmured sympathetically. Jake's response shattered any remaining illusions. He laughed. Don't worry about it. We can just buy one of those fancy leather ones from that shop in the city. I spent 3 weeks on that, I whispered, my voice trembling. He shrugged. It's just paper, Em. In that moment, memories flooded back. Jake declining to display my artwork in our apartment. Vanessa suggesting I leave creativity to the professionals. Both of them exchanging glances whenever I mentioned my calligraphy dreams. This wasn't their first betrayal. It was just the first time I'd truly noticed. I fled the dinner, ignoring concerned calls from distant relatives. Rain began to fall as I walked alone through darkening streets, my silk rehearsal dress clinging to my skin. The steady rhythm of droplets masked my quiet sobs. My feet carried me instinctively to the one place I'd always felt understood, my grandmother's old calligraphy studio. The key was still hidden beneath the stone frog statue. Inside, dust motes danced in the beam of my phone's flashlight. The familiar scent of paper, ink, and beeswax enveloped me like a comforting hug. I collapsed into my grandmother's ancient chair, its leather worn soft by decades of creative work. What would you do, Gran? I whispered to the empty studio. As if in answer, my eyes landed on an envelope on the desk, my name written in my grandmother's distinctive script. With shaking fingers, I opened it, unfolding the letter within. My dearest Emma, it began. If you're reading this, I've passed on, but my legacy hasn't. I've left you two treasures. The old Willowbrook resort property. Yes, the one your grandfather and I were forced to sell pieces of over the years, and my special ink set. The property needs love but has potential. The ink is more precious. It shows true intentions when used by someone with clarity of vision. Both gifts were meant for someone who understands that art isn't just decoration, but truth. Someone like you. I uncovered the ornate wooden box beneath tissue paper, opening it to reveal glass bottles filled with ink in various shades. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, marking the minutes passing before my wedding day dawned. By sunrise, I'd written just one note in perfect calligraphy. 4 words that liberated me. The wedding is canceled. I watched golden light spill across the dusty studio, illuminating my grandmother's tools and my tear-stained face. Something new stirred within me: determination, purpose, artistic fire. I was reborn in that moment without the relationship that had slowly suffocated my creativity. The Jake and Vanessa chapter was over, but my story? It was just beginning. What I didn't realize as I sipped tea from my grandmother's chipped mug and planned my next steps was that fate would soon bring them back into my life, with consequences none of us could have anticipated. 6 months after walking away from my wedding, I hunched over my drafting table, squinting at an invitation design. My custom stationery business, Emma's Impressions, barely kept the lights on, but it was mine. The soft scratch of my pen against textured paper soothed my frayed nerves as I worked on a rush order. My phone pinged with an email alert. A new client, referred by a high-end event planner, wanted wedding invitations. The budget made my eyes widen, triple my usual rate. I trembled with excitement, drafting a response immediately. The client, a V. Mitchell, requested my portfolio and a meeting with specific design parameters: modern romance with elevated rustic elements. Something about the phrasing tickled my memory, but the promise of much-needed income overshadowed my concern. I poured my heart into sample designs, incorporating delicate botanical illustrations and my signature calligraphy. The pearlescent ink caught the light as I packed everything carefully for the client meeting. The scent of fresh ink and paper filled my tiny apartment as I dressed in my most professional outfit. The meeting location was a trendy downtown cafe that reeked of expensive coffee and exclusivity. I arrived early, arranging my samples on the marble tabletop. When the bell above the door jingled, I glanced up with a practiced smile that instantly froze. Vanessa strutted toward me, Jake trailing behind. My former maid of honor's eyes gleamed with malicious triumph. "Emma, what a surprise," she purred, sliding into the chair across from me. "When our event planner mentioned a local stationery artist, we had no idea it would be you." My stomach plunged as Jake settled beside her, flashing his corporate smile. "Hey, Em, long time." I gripped my portfolio case until my knuckles whitened. "You're V. Mitchell." "Soon to be V. Cooper," she corrected, flashing an enormous diamond ring. "Jake and I are getting married at Mountain View Resort next spring." The betrayal crashed over me anew, not just their relationship, which I'd suspected even before canceling my wedding, but this deliberate humiliation. They'd sought me out, pretending to be anonymous clients, just to what? Remind me of my inadequacy? I struggled to maintain professionalism. "I see. Well, here are the samples you requested." Jake flipped through my work with casual disregard. "These are quaint." He exchanged a look with Vanessa, but not quite the premium standard we're aiming for. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "I told the planner we needed someone established, not a hobby business." She pushed my samples back across the table. "We'll be canceling the order." "Our wedding needs to impress," Jake added. "It's being featured in Style and Society magazine." I gathered my rejected work, summoning dignity I didn't feel. "I understand. Best wishes on your wedding." Outside, rain pelted the sidewalk, matching my mood as I trudged to my car. Shame burned through me, not just from their rejection, but from my own weakness. Why had their opinions still affected me? That evening, I drove to my grandmother's property. My property now. Willowbrook Resort sprawled across 30 acres, its once grand buildings weathered by neglect. I'd been living in the small caretaker's cottage, too intimidated by the restoration cost to do more than basic maintenance. Inside the cottage, I opened my grandmother's wooden ink box, fingers hovering over the bottles. "Shows true intentions," she'd written. I selected a deep midnight blue and began creating a new portfolio. Not for clients, but for myself. I worked through the night, each piece more daring than the last. When dawn broke, I wandered the overgrown grounds with my camera, positioning my creations against crumbling stone walls and weathered wooden doors. The morning dew dampened my shoes, its earthy fragrance mingling with wildflowers as I captured images that highlighted the contrast between refined artistry and natural decay. Something clicked, not just my camera shutter, but in my mind. Quietly, I began renovating one wing of the main building, using the last of my savings. I slept on a mattress on the floor, showered with a garden hose, and ate ramen noodles for weeks. But each day, the space transformed, exposing original hardwood floors, restoring leaded glass windows, revealing the property's forgotten elegance. No one knew what I was doing. Not my few remaining friends, not my parents who still expressed disappointment over my impulsive wedding cancellation. This was my private rebellion, my reclamation. 3 weeks later, I crafted a special invitation. Using my grandmother's ink, I created a piece that revealed hidden text when held to light. Willowbrook Revival, an investment opportunity. I mailed it to Carter Jensen, a hospitality investor known for restoring historic properties. His assistant called within days. "Mr. Jensen rarely takes meetings with unknowns," she said skeptically, "but he was impressed by your invitation." The scent of fresh paint and sawdust hung in the air when Carter arrived at Willowbrook. His expensive shoes crunched on the gravel driveway as I welcomed him, heart racing beneath my composed exterior. "This place has potential," he admitted after the tour, running his hand along a restored banister. "But the investment required is substantial." I unrolled my business plan on an antique table. "I don't need full funding, just enough to restore the main building and grounds. The property has historical significance and unmatched views." I slid forward a folder of my property photographs, paired with my calligraphy work. "I envision an exclusive retreat for artists and creative events." Carter studied the photographs, then me. "You did all this yourself?" I nodded. He smiled slowly. "You know, this property was once the social center of the region, before the interstate diverted traffic." "My grandmother told me stories," I replied, not mentioning that Jake's family had engineered the property's downfall decades ago, purchasing surrounding land to block access until my grandparents were forced to sell portions at devastating losses. Carter extended his hand. "Let's discuss preliminary funding." I signed the paperwork that afternoon, securing enough to restore the main building and grounds. As Carter drove away, I stood on the crumbling steps, savoring my secret victory. No one knew I now had the means to resurrect Willowbrook. Not even Jake and Vanessa, who would soon discover that their perfect wedding venue wasn't what it seemed. The clock was ticking on their perfect wedding plans, though they didn't know it yet. And I had just made my first quiet power move in a game they didn't even realize we were playing. I didn't see Jake and Vanessa again for nearly 2 months. By then, Willowbrook's transformation had accelerated beyond my wildest dreams. Workers swarmed the property daily, restoring ornate moldings and rebuilding the grand staircase while I directed every detail. The scent of fresh-cut lumber and linseed oil permeated the air as the resort gradually reclaimed its former glory. One rainy Tuesday, my phone rang with an unknown number. I balanced precariously on a ladder, touching up paint on a ceiling medallion, and almost ignored it. "Emma's Impressions," I answered professionally, though my stationery business had become secondary to the resort renovation. "We need to speak with the owner of a Willowbrook resort." The male voice sounded stressed but familiar. My paintbrush froze mid-stroke. "Jake." "This is her assistant," I lied, my voice pitched slightly higher. "How can I help you?" "Our wedding venue double-booked us," Jake explained, frustration evident. "We've tried 6 other locations, but everything's reserved. We heard Willowbrook is under renovation for events." I gripped the ladder to steady myself. "The owner is quite selective about bookings." "Listen," Jake's tone sharpened. "I'm Jake Cooper. My fiancé and I are influencers with over 2 million combined followers. Having our wedding at your venue would be incredible exposure. We'd need it for the second weekend in May." The universe had a wicked sense of humor. Their wedding was exactly when we planned our grand reopening. "I'll speak with the owner," I replied evenly. "We're having a site visit for potential clients tomorrow at 2. You're welcome to attend." After hanging up, I collapsed onto a dusty drop cloth and howled with laughter. The construction foreman gave me a concerned look, but I waved him off. This perfect coincidence felt like my grandmother's cosmic intervention. That night, I carefully selected my disguise. Pulling my hair into a severe bun, I added tortoiseshell glasses and a conservative pantsuit. Nothing like my usual artistic attire. In the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. Jake and Vanessa arrived 15 minutes late the next day, both glued to their phones. Neither looked up as I greeted them with a clipboard and a firm handshake. I'm Ms. Collins, the owner's assistant. She sends her regrets but is in meetings with investors today. Vanessa finally glanced up, eyes skimming over me without recognition. This place is surprising. We expected something more rustic. I guided them through the partially renovated main building, explaining our vision for the property. A luxury destination for sophisticated events and creative retreats. The chandelier in the ballroom had just been reinstalled that morning, crystal teardrops catching afternoon sunlight and sending rainbows dancing across freshly plastered walls. Even Jake and Vanessa momentarily stopped texting to stare. Not bad, Jake admitted grudgingly. Who's designing the interiors? Vanessa asked, studying the color palette I'd selected. Some of these choices seem amateur. I stiffened but maintained my facade. The owner is quite involved in the design process. Jake snorted. Well, she should hire professionals. This wallpaper in the reception area? All wrong for the architectural period. I swallowed my retort, knowing the wallpaper was an exact replica of the original 1920s pattern, sourced from historical archives. And these fixtures, Vanessa added, gesturing toward handcrafted sconces I'd commissioned from a local artisan. They look handmade. For a luxury property, you need established brands. Their criticisms continued as we toured the property. Each barb stung, yet strengthened my resolve. They hadn't changed. Still the same pretentious, image-obsessed people who'd mocked my wedding invitations. As we reached the gardens, Jake pulled me aside. Look, we really need this venue. Our wedding's been featured in pre-promotion for Style and Society magazine. Canceling would be catastrophic for our brand partnerships. The owner is quite selective, I repeated, savoring the moment. Jake glanced around before pulling out his wallet. I understand. Would a consultation fee help secure our date? He extended 5 crisp $100 bills. My skin crawled at the attempted bribe. I'll discuss it with her. Vanessa joined us, her designer heels sinking into the soft garden soil. Tell your boss we'd be doing her a favor. Having our wedding here would put this place on the map. I nodded noncommittally and guided them to the former library, now my office, though they didn't know it was mine. My grandmother's ink set was displayed prominently on the antique desk. What's that? Vanessa pointed to the ornate wooden box. A family heirloom of the owner's, I explained. Apparently the ink has special properties. Jake rolled his eyes. Right. If you're serious about booking, I said, pulling out a standard contract, you can complete this preliminary agreement. The owner will make the final decision. I watched them skim the document, barely reading before initiating each page. Using my grandmother's special ink, midnight blue with a silvery sheen, I'd drafted what appeared to be a standard venue contract. What they failed to notice were the carefully worded clauses about behavioral expectations, compliance with staff directions, and substantial penalties for cancellation or public disparagement of the property. Jake signed with a flourish, then slid the contract across the desk. When will we hear the final decision? Soon, I promised. The owner values proper conduct above all else in her clients. After they left, I remained at the desk, fingertips pressed against the contract, feeling something close to pity beneath my triumph. They had no idea what they'd just signed or to whom. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of final renovations and planning. The grand reopening announcement went out to selected media and industry influencers. Willowbrook Resort would debut with an exclusive calligraphy exhibition sponsored by Pencraft, a famous stationery brand that had approached me after seeing my portfolio online. The partnership had happened swiftly and unexpectedly. Pencraft wanted to launch a signature line of Emma Willowbrook calligraphy supplies, using my grandmother's surname I'd taken professionally. Their offer included exclusive sponsorship of our opening weekend, the weekend of Jake and Vanessa's wedding. Only one person knew the full truth, my friend Lily, who'd stood by me through everything. We sat in the fully restored garden pavilion the week before opening, afternoon sunlight filtering through wisteria vines. You own this entire place, Lily gasped after I finally revealed my secret. But how? The renovation must have cost millions. I explained about my grandmother's bequest, Carter's investment, and the historical significance of the property. What I haven't told you is that Jake's family basically stole this land from my grandparents decades ago. The jasmine-scented breeze carried the distant sounds of staff preparing for the opening. They manipulated road access and water rights until my grandparents had to sell sections at losses. I continued. Now Jake and Vanessa are having their wedding here without knowing I'm the owner. Lily's eyes widened. Does anyone else know? Only Carter, and he finds the whole situation amusing, I admitted. The staff thinks I'm just the creative director. 3 days later, I watched from my office window as Jake and Vanessa's glossy black SUV pulled up the newly graveled driveway. Their expression when they entered the fully transformed lobby was worth every penny of investment. Vanessa's jaw literally dropped as she took in the soaring ceilings, custom light fixtures, and signature color scheme, all designed by the amateur she'd dismissed. Jake's eyes bulged at the celebrities mingling in the reception area, actors, musicians, and fellow influencers invited for our grand opening. Welcome to Willowbrook, I greeted them warmly, now dressed in my role as creative director, my disguise discarded. They stared blankly before recognition dawned. Emma? Jake stammered. You work here? In a manner of speaking, I replied enigmatically. Your room is ready in the East Wing. The welcome reception begins at 7 in the grand ballroom. They followed a staff member to their room, whispering frantically to each other. Their confusion delighted me perhaps more than it should have. That evening, the ballroom glittered with candlelight as guests in evening wear mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. The exhibition of my calligraphy work lined the walls, each piece showcased like fine art. I wore my grandmother's vintage dress, a 1950s emerald silk that fell just below my knees, and entered last, pausing at the top of the grand staircase. The room gradually quieted as Carter clinked a knife against his champagne glass. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, welcome to the Reborn Willowbrook Resort. He gestured toward me. None of this would be possible without our visionary owner and creative director, Emma Willowbrook. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I descended the stairs. Jake and Vanessa stood frozen near the chocolate fountain, champagne flutes halfway to their lips. Many of you know my work through my calligraphy, I said, voice carrying across the hushed room. What you may not know is that Willowbrook was my grandmother's legacy, returned now to its former glory. I glided past stunned guests to where Jake and Vanessa stood. Imagine my surprise, I continued, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, when the couple who once mocked my amateur designs and little business chose my resort for their wedding. The same resort whose renovation they criticized as... I paused for effect. What was the word? Ah, yes. Obviously amateur. Cameras flashed as I smiled directly at them. Fortunately, that amateur work appears on this month's cover of Architectural Digest. The magazine was prominently displayed at each table setting, the resort's restored facade gleaming on its cover. Jake's face flushed crimson. Vanessa's knuckles whitened around her glass. Around us, influential guests whispered and pointed. The clock had run out on their charade, and my revenge was just beginning. The rehearsal dinner the following evening was a masterpiece of subtle revenge. I had transformed our vintage wine cellar into an intimate dining space, with handcrafted place cards guiding guests to their seats. The air was thick with the aroma of truffles and aged cheese, creating an atmosphere of luxury that even Jake and Vanessa couldn't criticize. As appetizers were served, I unveiled the first part of my exhibition, a wall of wedding invitations, elegantly framed. At the center hung the designs Jake and Vanessa had rejected 6 months earlier. Our featured exhibition celebrates the journey of artistic vision, I announced, raising my glass. From rejection to recognition. The guests murmured appreciatively, several famous designers in attendance nodding in approval. A well-known stationery influencer snapped photos, her followers already commenting on the exquisite craftsmanship. Jake approached me by the champagne tower, his smile tense. Emma, this is all very impressive. He lowered his voice. Look, I always knew you had talent. I was just trying to push you to reach your potential. I sipped my champagne slowly, the bubbles tickling my nose. How interesting. That's not what you said when you called my work embarrassing and quaint. His smile faltered. You misunderstood. Did I? I gestured toward a display panel where his actual words appeared in glowing script, previously invisible but now revealed under the special lighting I'd installed. My grandmother's ink had indeed shown true intentions, capturing their exact mockery from the garden that day, preserved forever. Jake's face drained of color as he read his own cruel words. Nearby, guests leaned in, phones discreetly recording his reaction. Vanessa didn't fare better in her damage control attempt. She cornered me by the dessert display, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes panicked. Emma, darling, she gushed, loud enough for others to hear. I've always said you were talented. In fact, I practically discovered you. I smiled placidly. Really? When was that? Before or after you spilled wine on my guest book and laughed? Before she could respond, I directed her attention to another display where her dismissive comments appeared in the same revealing ink. Her face crumpled as she recognized her own words. That's not, I never, she sputtered. The ink doesn't lie, Vanessa, I said quietly. It simply reveals what was already there. The evening's true humiliation, however, came with dessert. I clinked my glass for attention. As part of our opening weekend entertainment, we're hosting a special calligraphy workshop, I announced. According to their contract, our wedding couple has graciously agreed to demonstrate their own artistic abilities. Jake and Vanessa exchanged panicked glances as staff distributed fine paper and pen sets to each table. But we didn't agree to, Jake began. I produced their contract, the special clause highlighted. Section 12, paragraph 3. Client agrees to participate in all scheduled activities during their event weekend. You both signed it. The room buzzed with anticipation as influencers readied their cameras. Under the bright lights and scrutinizing eyes of artistic professionals, Jake and Vanessa fumbled with the calligraphy pens, producing childish scrawls that contrasted sharply with the elegant work displayed around the room. Perhaps wedding planning isn't the only thing that requires professional help, remarked a famous designer, triggering ripples of laughter. Their humiliation became the viral moment of the evening, captured by every influencer in attendance. Had calligraphy fail trended within hours, their once perfect image tarnished by their own arrogance. But the final blow came the following morning when Jake's parents arrived for the wedding. His father, Richard Cooper, strode through the lobby, his imperious gaze taking in the restored grandeur of Willowbrook. Where's the owner? He demanded of the concierge. I need to speak with them immediately. I emerged from my office, greeting him with professional courtesy. Mr. Cooper, welcome to Willowbrook. His eyes narrowed with confusion, then recognition. Emma, you work here? I own here, I corrected gently. Willowbrook Resort belongs to me. The blood drained from his face. That's impossible. This property was my grandmother's, I finished for him. Before your family manipulated the circumstances that forced her to sell portions at devastating losses. Richard glanced around nervously at the guests milling in the lobby. Those are serious allegations, young lady. Not allegations. History. I gestured toward the resort's museum room where we preserve the property's legacy. We've created a special historical exhibit documenting Willowbrook's journey, including the original deeds, the correspondence between your father and my grandfather, and the water rights manipulation that nearly bankrupted my family. Inside the museum room, elegantly displayed behind glass, were the damning documents, letters, legal papers, and maps showing how the Cooper family had systematically cut off access routes and diverted water from Willowbrook until my grandparents could no longer maintain it. Richard's hands trembled as he examined the exhibit. Where did you get these? My grandmother kept everything, I replied. She believed the truth would eventually matter. Jake and Vanessa entered, drawn by the commotion. Jake's face paled as he took in the historical display and his father's obvious distress. Dad, what's going on? Richard turned to his son, defeat evident in his slumped shoulders. We should talk privately. As they huddled in hushed, urgent conversation, I welcomed other guests to the museum, explaining the historical significance of various artifacts. I caught fragments of their whispered argument, family reputation, and public relations disaster, and can't afford legal battles. The wedding proceeded that afternoon, though with noticeably less enthusiasm. Half the invited influencers had mysteriously received better offers elsewhere, their social media suddenly silent about the wedding of the season. The ceremony felt hollow, the celebrations forced. I maintained professional composure throughout, ensuring every contractual obligation was fulfilled perfectly. My revenge wasn't in providing poor service. It was in providing exceptional service that highlighted how unexceptional they truly were. As the last wedding guest departed the following morning, I retreated to my grandmother's restored studio. Sunlight spilled through leaded glass windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The lingering scent of beeswax and ink comforted me as I sorted through correspondence from potential clients. Invitations now arriving daily since the viral coverage of our opening weekend. A sharp knock disrupted my peace. I opened the door to find Jake standing alone, his designer luggage beside him, his expression uncharacteristically humble. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Just for a minute." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Jake entered slowly, taking in the studio with newfound appreciation. He ran his fingers along my workbench, touching tools and papers with unusual reverence. "This place is incredible," he said finally. "What you've done with Willowbrook, it's beyond anything I imagined possible." I crossed my arms. "What do you want, Jake?" He turned to face me, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about us, about what went wrong." "There is no us," I reminded him. "But there could be something new," he pressed. "Not romantically. I get that ship has sailed, but professionally." His eyes gleamed with sudden enthusiasm. "Your artistic vision combined with my business connections could create something extraordinary." I remained silent, watching him shift into familiar sales mode. "Think about it, Emma. I have contacts at every major lifestyle brand. Together, we could elevate your work beyond this remote location. Take Willowbrook International." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "With my help, you could launch a global brand. Willowbrook Studios, maybe. Luxury stationery, home goods, boutique hotels." "Why would I need your help?" I asked. "I'm doing fine without you." Jake's facade cracked slightly. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "The truth is, my family's investments haven't performed well lately. The scandal from your museum exhibit has already affected our business relationships." "You mean people don't want to work with a family that built its fortune by manipulating others?" I asked innocently. He flinched. "We're nearly bankrupt, Emma. This property, what my family once owned part of, could be our salvation." The naked opportunism staggered me. Not an apology, not true remorse, just another attempt to use me for his benefit. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "After mocking my work, betraying me with my maid of honor, and trying to bribe my staff, you want me to save your family business." "I'm trying to create a win-win situation," he insisted. "You'd benefit too." Before I could respond, a sharp rap at the door interrupted us. I opened it to find Vanessa, her perfect makeup slightly smudged from crying, her designer outfit rumpled from hasty packing. "Emma, thank God you're here," she blurted, pushing past me into the studio. She froze when she saw Jake. "What are you doing here?" "Business discussion," he muttered. "What do you want?" Vanessa straightened her shoulders. "The same thing, actually." She turned to me, her expression desperate. "Emma, my followers are destroying me over that calligraphy disaster. 3 sponsorships have already canceled. My engagement metrics are plummeting." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not feeling sorry at all. "I need an exclusive interview about Willowbrook's transformation," she continued. "The rising female entrepreneur finding success after heartbreak? It's the perfect narrative pivot." "You want to use me to rehabilitate your image?" I clarified. "I'd credit you as my longtime inspiration," she offered urgently. "We could rewrite our history, make it seem like we've always supported each other." The studio suddenly felt too small with both of them inside, the air thick with their desperation. A third knock on the door made me sigh deeply. Who else wanted something from me? The answer was Richard Cooper, Jake's father, his imperious manner now replaced with barely concealed agitation. His tailored suit couldn't disguise the tension in his shoulders. "Ms. Willowbrook," he began formally, "I'd like to discuss some business matters with you. Privately." He glared at his son and Vanessa. "If this concerns Jake's proposal about saving your family business, they can stay," I said. Richard's jaw tightened. "I was unaware Jake had approached you already. Nevertheless, there are legal considerations regarding how this property changed hands. My attorneys will be investigating potential irregularities in the original sales." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Cooper?" "Simply stating facts," he replied. "Historic property transfers often contain technicalities that modern courts might find interesting." The steady tick of my grandmother's old clock filled the silence. 3 people representing every betrayal I'd endured stood before me, each wanting something only I could provide: salvation, relevance, control. The smooth wood of my grandmother's ink box felt cool beneath my fingers as I moved to my desk. I selected a bottle of midnight blue ink, its surface catching the light as I uncapped it. The rich, earthy smell of the ink mixed with the studio's beeswax aroma as I dipped my favorite pen, the one my grandmother had used to write that final letter to me. With deliberate, unhurried strokes, I wrote a single word in perfect calligraphy on 3 separate cards: "No." The ink glistened wet on the heavy paper as I handed one card to each of them. "This is my answer to all of you," I said quietly. "No partnerships, no interviews, no legal threats." Richard's face flushed crimson. "You're making a serious mistake." "Actually, I've already corrected a serious mistake," I replied evenly, "when I walked away from people who never valued me or my art." From my desk drawer, I withdrew an elegant envelope and presented it to Jake and Vanessa. "Your wedding gift." Inside was a meticulously calligraphed map to the Roadway Inn, a budget motel 10 miles down the highway. "Your contract has been terminated due to multiple violations of our behavioral clause," I explained. "Your belongings have been transferred to new accommodations more suited to your budget constraints." Jake's mouth opened and closed without sound. Vanessa clutched her designer purse like a shield. "You can't do this," Richard finally sputtered. "We have rights." "Section 18 of the contract your son signed allows for immediate termination with cause," I interrupted calmly, "and I have documented cause." I walked to the door and held it open. "Unless you'd prefer I share the complete historical exhibit with the business press? I hear they love stories about generational wealth built on questionable practices." The 3 of them filed out silently, their perfect facades finally shattered beyond repair. As the door closed behind them, I leaned against it, suddenly exhausted, not by their presence, but by the realization that they no longer had any power over me. Outside, birds chirped in the garden as staff prepared for new guests arriving that afternoon. My phone buzzed with messages from Carter about expansion plans and from Pencraft about the calligraphy line launch. Life was moving forward. I gathered the cards I'd written, the ink now dry. The simple, elegant no represented something profound. Not just rejection, but the quiet power of knowing my own worth. My grandmother's understanding smile seemed to hover in the dust motes dancing through sunbeams. Through the window, I watched the Cooper's car disappear down the driveway, growing smaller until it vanished beyond the property gates. Something tight in my chest finally loosened. The weight of betrayal I'd carried for so long had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but freedom from the need for their approval or love. The truth was, I hadn't restored Willowbrook solely for revenge. I'd done it because it was mine, my heritage, my passion, my vision. The revenge had been satisfying, but it wasn't the point. The point was creating something authentic and beautiful from the ruins of disappointment. I returned to my desk, picking up a blank card. What would I write next, now that this chapter was closing? What creation would flow from my hands now that they were unburdened by resentment? The possibilities stretched before me like the resort's gardens, wild and beautiful and entirely mine to shape. 1 year later, I stood at the entrance to Willowbrook's grand ballroom, watching 24 artists arrange their materials at custom-built calligraphy stations. Sunlight streamed through restored stained glass, casting rainbow patterns across polished floors as excited voices echoed beneath crystal chandeliers. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the distinctive aroma of hand-mixed inks. "Welcome to Willowbrook's first annual calligraphy retreat," I announced, stepping to the center of the room. "For the next week, this historic property is your creative sanctuary." The diverse group, ranging from established artists to complete beginners, smiled back at me. 6 of them wore special badges identifying them as recipients of the Eleanor Willowbrook Scholarship, named for my grandmother. The program provided full funding for promising artists who couldn't afford the retreat's premium price. "Each of you is here because you believe in the power of handcrafted beauty in a digital world," I continued. "That belief connects you to this place and its history." Lily, now Willowbrook's operations director, approached with an urgent message. Pencraft's CEO had arrived early for tomorrow's business meeting. Our calligraphy line had exceeded sales projections by 300%. I nodded calmly, remembering how a year ago such an unexpected change would have rattled me. Now I simply adjusted. "Today we'll begin with fundamentals," I told the group. "But first, explore the property, connect with fellow artists, and let this place inspire you." As they dispersed, I slipped away to my sanctuary, the resort's clifftop gazebo overlooking the valley. The breeze carried the fragrance of wild honeysuckle as I settled on the bench, watching clouds drift across the vast sky. From this height, Willowbrook spread below me like a dream made solid. Gardens blooming, fountains playing, paths winding between carefully restored buildings. A year of work had transformed not just the property, but my life. Willowbrook now hosted monthly creative retreats alongside weddings and corporate events. My calligraphy line sold internationally. The museum documenting the resort's history had become a tourist attraction. Success had arrived with such speed and completeness that sometimes I worried I'd wake to find it all vanished. I no longer worried about Jake and Vanessa. They'd relocated across the country after Jake's family declared bankruptcy. According to Lily, who still monitored such things, Vanessa had rebranded herself as a mindfulness influencer, while Jake worked for his uncle's insurance company. Their public humiliation had faded from social media memory, replaced by newer scandals. The revenge that had once seemed so important now felt like a distant chapter, satisfying but closed. What remained was the joy of creation and the peace of being truly seen for my work. I pulled out my leather portfolio, opening it to my current project, a handwritten book chronicling my grandmother's artistic journey. The pages contained her techniques, philosophies, and personal history, illustrated with photographs and samples of her work I'd discovered in the attic. The final chapter explored the special ink set she'd left me. The mystery of the ink had finally been solved during a professional analysis commissioned for the Pencraft product line. It contained high-quality ingredients, nothing magical, just excellent components combined with skill and intention. The true magic, I realized, had been my grandmother's belief in herself and in me. I traced my fingers over her handwriting in the original recipe, feeling a profound connection across time. She hadn't left me magic ink. She'd left me the understanding that I already possessed everything I needed. The ink hadn't revealed others' true intentions. It had revealed my own power to see truth clearly. The book would be placed in the resort's museum, alongside the original ink set, completing the circle of our shared legacy. Writing it had been healing, helping me understand that my success wasn't just about proving critics wrong, it was about honoring the artistic lineage that flowed through my veins. As afternoon light gilded the landscape, I took out one final piece of stationery, a single card embossed with the Willowbrook crest. On it, I wrote an invitation to myself for a private celebration that evening, on this very spot. A small ritual to mark the journey from abandoned bride to successful artist and businesswoman. I smiled, remembering how a year ago I'd left my rehearsal dinner in tears, walking through rain to my grandmother's studio. Now I walked purposefully through gardens I owned, my footsteps confident on paths I'd restored. That evening, as promised in my self-invitation, I returned to the cliff with a small picnic basket. The setting sun painted the valley in gold and amber as I poured a glass of champagne. I toasted the sky, imagining my grandmother watching with approval. "To endings and beginnings," I whispered. A soft breeze rustled the pages of my leather journal, flipping them open as if guided by an invisible hand. The blank pages seemed to glow in the fading light, empty not with absence, but with possibility. I uncapped my pen and began to write, the words flowing with new purpose. The true power of art isn't in revenge or recognition, but in creation itself. The act of making something beautiful from pain is the most profound transformation. The pen moved across the page with sure, steady strokes as twilight deepened around me. Stars appeared one by one, ancient light traveling vast distances to reach this moment. I felt my grandmother's presence not as a ghost, but as a continuation. Her artistic spirit living through my hands. This was the true inheritance she'd left me. Not just a property or a business, but the courage to transform betrayal into beauty, pain into purpose, and ending into a beginning. I closed the journal as darkness embraced the valley. Tomorrow would bring new guests, new challenges, new creations. But tonight, in this peaceful moment, I acknowledged the journey that had brought me here, from heartbreak to wholeness, from abandoned to autonomous, from betrayed to believing. The final page of my story remained unwritten, the ink not yet dry. But I no longer feared the blank page or worried about others' judgments of what I might create upon it. I had found something more valuable than revenge. The freedom to write my own story, in my own hand, with my own authentic voice. And that, I realized as I gathered my things to return to the warmth of Willowbrook, was the most beautiful art of all.